Jean Phillips-Martinsson. Phillips is my maiden name. Martinsson was my husband's name, who was Swedish. And I am honorary president of IPWSO and honorary president of the Swedish prader-willi organization. We realized there was something wrong, but in those days, nobody knew a thing. We had no computers, we had no faxes. So we were in limbo. We were told nobody knew what was wrong with him, but obviously it was something to do with the brain. The only advice I was given by my very nice doctor was that we must choose whether to speak English or Swedish. Normally parents with different mother tongues use both, but that would be too much strain, they said, for whatever Anders had as a diagnosis, which he didn't have. So we unfortunately listened to that. That was the worst information. It was very, very wrong. I still feel that that is important to mention because I think prader-willis seem to have, many of them, an enormous memory. And therefore, language is a good thing for them. It makes them more normal. It gives them something special. He was diagnosed when he was 14 years old. We were in limbo for 14 years. We finally sent him to an English boarding school, having spoken no English to him, as we were told. Only to discover, the headmaster told us that after 3 months, he was speaking fluent English. And from the start, he understood everything they were saying in English, even if he didn't speak it. As long as they were speaking about him, he understood everything. Well, Anders was diagnosed when he was finally diagnosed. The first thing I thought was, are we alone in Sweden? As I said, still no computers, no form of getting in touch with people. The doctor, when we were diagnosed because there was the international medical magazine called The Lancet published their first article about prader-willi syndrome. The doctor who had been treating Anders without knowing a diagnosis called me and showed me this document and said, I think this sounds like Anders. Anders was then in England, and the article had been written by an English doctor, so I don't remember how I managed to find where he was, and visited him when I visited my son in England. I took Anders with me. He confirmed the diagnosis. And to my great surprise, I said to him, as far as I know, he's the only one in Sweden. Are there any more in the world that you know of? And he said, well, I have a colleague in Sweden. I've never met him, but his name is Professor Martin Ritzen from Karolinska. And I think I read somewhere that he had just diagnosed a few in Sweden. So I had to go all the way to England, which started my international thoughts, before I could discover that there was somebody in Sweden who might be able to help me. Back to Sweden, contacted my own doctor, or Anders' own doctor, who had never heard of Professor Martin Ritzen, because again, they didn't have contact with each other. And he, of course, found him for me, and I visited him without Anders first. And he told me he had just recently diagnosed 4 others. I couldn't believe it. And I've never forgotten when I said, give me their telephone numbers, I'll phone them immediately. They must be dying to meet somebody. Have they met each other? Oh, no, of course not, he replied. You're not Swedish, so you don't know that here we have something called, and what is it called in English? Integrity. And that means we have absolutely no right to give names of our patients to each other. So I remember saying to him, if you had been in my situation and had a son born 14 years ago and sat in limbo, you'd realize that I need to meet the others and they'll be dying to meet each other. So after lots of nice conversations, we agreed that I would write a letter to them, and I invited them 19th of April 1986 to my home, and Martin Ritz-Sen sent out that letter to 4 to me unknown people, and all of them turned up. And I immediately began to think, these people are Swedish. I wonder if they speak English. We need to go international. Sweden is a much too small a country, a very big country with a very small population. And those people speak Swedish, even if there's many of them speak very good English. So few people in the world speak Swedish. We must go international, because there must be countries where prader-willi isn't known at all, and must be countries where maybe they have a lot of them. Who knows? It hasn't been talked about. We've got to go international. So as I met these 4 people, we began talking about Sweden first, but immediately international. We all agreed we have to go international. One of the mothers had a contact somehow with America, and she said they've got an organization. So while we're at the same time trying to find others, but we could with the help of our doctors in Sweden, and as I was working internationally, traveling the world, every time I went anywhere, Martin Ritz-Sen would contact colleagues by post. Again, it took ages. And I always, when I went on my business world, never left without having gone to some big hospital where there was an endocrinologist who was interested or had already diagnosed, so mostly not at all. But that way, I somehow managed to get 22 countries. So that when we decided to have our first international organization, the first conference is what I mean, I wrote to all those 22 countries. I had their telephone numbers and wrote to them personally, and they all came, whether or not they had it diagnosed in their countries. So that is probably the start to the most wonderful organization that's got bigger and bigger. And the more and more countries are still joining it, even at this age. Prader-Willis weren't understood. It was a very unknown diagnosis. They were all very different. But I knew that that had to be somehow put out, not just as we knew it in England or in Sweden, but so the whole world would understand it. And that first conference improved that even more. We had, to me, it's very exciting, because we decided then we must have at least 4 days conference. Had one day, the first day with scientists only, to which parents could attend but not talk. And then the day after that would be a parents' day, when it would be the opposite. The doctors could come but not interrupt, but they were there to be asked questions if needed, because there were thousands of questions. We decided as well that research took so long, but there was so much research not being done, nothing had been done in those days, that we'd need at least 3 years between each conference, international conference. So that was decided then, and is still the same today. We had, of course, we decided at that conference, again, that we should have a committee, and there should be parents. At that time, we decided parents only should be on the board, because in those days we said parents are there forever, and doctors, of course, change jobs. So we needed the people on the board, but now, of course, they've changed, and there's a mixture of scientists and parents on the board. With the first sort of 5 or 6 years, we were, I think probably more than that, parents only. Each country, that was decided as well, it's the same today, I think. Each country was asked to provide 1 parent delegate to represent IPSO and 1 professional delegate. And then as things progressed with Prader-Willi and the research, and many more countries, I think Sweden was one of the first to open a special Prader-Willi group home for the adults. Then more and more countries opened Prader-Willi just for Prader-Willi, no other handicaps with them. and they have still conferences, but they've added one extra day for carers. For all carers in different countries have very different, due to cultural differences mostly, very different ways of agreeing or not agreeing on having just prader-willis in a group home. But I think today, most countries, again, not maybe in many of the countries who still haven't got the diagnosis, but when they're born quite quickly, they'll get the diagnosis. And all I can say is, it's the most wonderful thing in the world. I know it sounds stupid, but it took over my life completely, despite that I went on with my job. But looking after my son in a way that every day there was something new that happened. But it was okay, he had the occasional temper tantrum. But I learned, as one will, as you get over things, that never give in, never let him have what he's having a temper tantrum about, but talk him through things. Let the temper tantrum lie down, don't try and do anything at the time, but just wait until things have calmed down. Normally, I think anyhow, Anders would always say, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to talk about it. But a few days later, he would like to talk about it. We went through things quietly and very well. And he did have so many things. When you asked Anders, what's it like to have Prader-Willi syndrome? He used to say, I wouldn't know what it's like to be without it. And I must admit that, of course, nobody wants to have a handicapped child in any way, but it does give you a very special life. You meet so many people who normally you have nothing in common with, except the fact that you've all got Prader-Willi children, even if those are very different. It brings you together in quite a different way from anything else. It's a wonderful society, and IPWSO does that as well internationally. And I think it's so wonderful that it's still going on. I, of course, had always decided when, as you get older in life, everybody knows they have to do a will. And I, of course, had left everything in my will, not to Anders, because you aren't allowed to leave it, but to, in Sweden, you have, where he still lived, in Sweden you have, I don't know if you have it around the world, somebody who takes over and looks after your child. The whole of every will I made, of course, was leaving the money for Anders in charge of a power of attorney, because he couldn't ever, I could never leave him any money. He never, must be strange, he was 50 years old, just about to be 50 when he died. Must be so strange as a 50-year-old never to have had money in your pocket, which he never had. But he knew why, because he would spend it on goodies. And I think that all my wills and all my life and my husband's life had been the fact that Anders was the only one of the 5 at the group home who didn't have brothers and sisters. So, of course, everything had to be left for his care. And then I had also written that after his death, then a lot of money should go to International Prader-Willi, because I knew that was his baby and my baby. So, of course, when he passed away totally unexpectedly, 2000, well, just before this horrible thing, this pandemic started, that I had no reason to have any money. I've got no family apart from Anders. My husband passed away 12 years ago. So I would like Prader-Willi, the International Prader-Willi, especially to carry out more research, but obviously it's up to the board to decide how best to spend the money and what they need it for. My ideal would be research, go further, go deeper. There's so many things we still need to know, and I'm sure they will use it the best way possible. So that is why it's my baby, and it was also Anders' baby. So I would encourage all parents, or those who don't know what to do with their money, to leave money to IPWSO or to that sort of organization, their own national one if they prefer to, but it's really helpful because it's very difficult to get, for charities to get money these days. And if it's a charity that means so much to you as it does to all of us, then do that too.